Welcome to our channel of IGNOU Audiobooks, Indira Gandhi National Open University, School of Tourism and Hospitality Service Management, SOTHSM. Certificate in Tourism Studies, CTS. TS1 Foundation Course in Tourism. Block 1 Tourism Phenomenon. Unit 3 Historical Evolution and Development. 3.0 Objectives. After reading this unit, you will be able to understand broadly how the history of tourism came to be written. Familiarize yourself with the main sources used for writing the history of tourism. And understand how modern tourism came into existence. 3.1 Introduction. The moment we mention of history, the general assumption is that we want to know about the past, but few ask this question: why we intend to study the past? Well, we study the past because our present has evolved out of it, and to plan a better future we have to critically analyze the past as well as the present. However, different methods, approaches and interpretations are involved in this exercise. Ideological leanings and interests also determine the course of history writing. For example, the trend that dominated the European approach to the writing of history for a long time emphasized on unique events in the life cycle of a particular region. They were viewed from the point of view of the power controlling the state. Therefore, the history of the world was seen as a history of the rulers, princes and the aristocracy. There came another stage when social scientists tried to reorient methodology in history by adopting the methods of the physical sciences. Hence, historical methods were challenged to assert that all people have a history and different areas of the world have different histories. Soon there developed the theory of historical materialism to show that history proceeded through an inevitable process of change from lower to higher forms of social organization. There existed a dialectical relationship between man and nature, and man's use of nature as well as the manner in which he was to produce what he needed for civilizing his life. It was, therefore, possible to talk of a history of the people rather than of the ruling class. In the present context, the above-mentioned methodologies are also being questioned. Here, we are not going into the debate on various methodologies by passing any value judgments. The idea is to make you aware of the fact that there are different views, methods and trends in history writing. This unit deals with the history of tourism over the years. It takes into account the various sources that are used to analyze this history, keeping in view the time period, i.e., periodization. The transition FRCM travel to modern tourism has also been dealt with due emphasis on the Indian situation. Why a tourism professional should study the history of tourism is another aspect dealt with in the unit. 3.2 The need for history of tourism. The history of tourism was for a long time the history of European tourism, the assumption being that tourism was most developed in Europe. However, there emerged a school of historians which integrated economics, statistics, scientific methodology, anthropology and sociology to develop an interdisciplinary approach to the history of tourism. Yet, their methodology was limited in time as the statistical study of tourism is of recent origin. But they have identified sources that can be used to reconstruct the history of a period for which the statistical basis may not exist. As a result, we can apply this method to develop the history of tourism on a global as well as national scale. The mainstream objective to study the history of tourism is to understand the phenomenon in a particular society at a particular time. We do so in order to know the factors that encourage tourism development as well as the factors that discourage the growth of tourism. Moreover, a study of the history of tourism can help us to illustrate a dynamic model of tourism development. We can evaluate the role of tourism as well as establish concepts that help us to understand its impacts. We, therefore, do not only reconstruct the past or an event of characters but also develop generalizations that are more useful in understanding the present nature of the tourism phenomenon. The history of tourism also helps us in developing the theoretical framework within which the data on tourism can be verified. To avoid simple generalizations, the data for the history of tourism has to be carefully assessed. In early history, we have archaeological evidence of inns, hotels, villas, and transport, but such information is fragmentary and often covering periods of thousands of years. Moreover, interdisciplinary information was not always available in all periods and in all countries. For example, the French pioneered the history of tourism but looked only at the holiday pattern of the aristocracy. The British looked at key events and factors like standard of living, free time, cheap transport, spas, and seaside resorts and linked them to growth of industry, labor force, social legislation and local customs. But today we look at tourism as a system. In this, the physical, economic, technical, environmental, socio-political and cultural factors are studied to understand the links between the past and the present, and all this is used for future development. The history of tourism has made an important breakthrough in two areas. 1. Identification of sources of data. 2. Use of both written and oral history. A critical examination, PF. The historical process always highlights new perspectives within which a particular field of interest can be viewed. The establishment of the history of tourism also helps in establishing the credibility of tourism as an academic discipline, which in India is still in infancy. 3.3 Sources of data. The sources for the history of tourism are very diverse and related to the time context. For their validity, for example, the sources used to know about the ancient period are 1. Literary records. 2. Inscriptions. 3. Graffiti. 4. Papyrus receipts. 5. Seals. 6. Archaeological evidence including painted pottery. 7. Diplomatic records. 8. Archives, both private and public. 9. Oral history and folk culture, both traditional and personal, etc. 3.3.1 Statistical records. These are a primary source and are of recent origin. Statistics or numerical data began to be collected only after it was recognized that tourism has an important economic impact. Before 1914, tourism statistics did not exist, although secondary sources like health, safety, police, migration, taxation and census records were used to make assumptions on the development of tourism. Since 1920, the statistical base of tourism has been increasing. In 1921, Britain began to collect tourism statistics, and by 1945 most countries were doing so. In India, statistics of tourism only came into existence after the 1960s. Prior to that, tourism statistics relate to the Indian subcontinent as a whole. Colonial rule and the subsequent partition of the subcontinent make it difficult to collate the statistics of tourism prior to 1947. The volume of tourism statistics grew with the emergence of the International Union of Official Tourism Organizations, the national tourism bodies as well as international tourism organizations have achieved a great standardization of the data, although its reliability is often questioned. This is because there are at least 42 definitions of tourism and tourist in use around the world. Prior to 1920, the database of travel was taken from railway records, postal authorities and wherever possible, passport and visa authorities. From such records it was possible to reconstruct the volume of people who traveled, the time of the year they traveled, and the places they visited. The census reports and civil service commissions dealing with paid leave have also contributed to information regarding the holiday pattern of the salaried employees. Thus, there is a range of data from which information regarding tourism can be collected. Since tourism is a multidisciplinary activity, the sources of data are varied, but such data may not be comparable in all cases. 3.3.2 Secondary sources. Under this category come the personal documents that include diaries, journals and letters of educated travelers, academics and intellectuals, Mass communications, which include newspapers, journals, advertisements, guidebooks, magazines etc., which have been used to inform and persuade the public. These resources have been studied to form a picture of tourism, such as itineraries, important events and holiday patterns. They can be used as cross-referencing material. 3.4 Periodization and concepts. With the passage of time, the class of people involved in tourism have changed. As tourism becomes more democratized, the nature of the facilities also become more standardized if not universal. Using the concept of the emergence of the leisure class to distinguish tourism from other forms of travel, we can establish 6 periods in the history of tourism. 1. Ancient era. 2. Imperial era. 3. Pilgrimage. 4. The Grand Tour era. 5. The Transition era. 6. The Modern era. The following concepts were commonly used during all periods. I. Motivation, the value of new experience and the transformation of travel from survival to an improvement in the quality of life. This includes A. Curiosity, moving from the known to the unknown. B. Anticipation, what you hope to find, see and do. To look for something and evaluate every new experience. C. Leaving a mark for posterity, what the world offers and why you have experienced. 11. Holiday, the word has 2 sources, A. Religious and B. Secular. A. In Europe, a day was set aside, at the end of a work cycle, for religious rituals. And this day was called a holy day. In time, saints' days and certain other observances were added to the number of holidays when no work was done and everyone celebrated. B. The secular tradition was a part of the imperial system when the state granted public holidays to celebrate imperial glory. On these holidays no work was done and the people participated in feasting and fun. Public games and spectator sports were the highlights on such occasions. In time, the religious and secular combined and the day of rest became a part of all societies. Ill. Mode of travel was the state of the art in terms of transport networks and routes, vehicles, cost of travel, documentation and safe passage, wayside facilities, and conveniences to the traveler. IV. Tourism impacts, the influence of tourism not only on the lifestyle of the people but in bringing about changes in consumption and production as well as wealth. 3.5 Ancient period. I. N. Inscriptions, seals and cave, rock paintings etc. are evidences of travel in the early period. Such evidences suggest that travel was both difficult and dangerous. There was no concept of a safe return. Overland and sea journeys were undertaken but travel was slow, time-consuming and route networks were not well developed. The cost of travel was high because wayside facilities were rarely available. Human beings were still subject to the power of nature and travel was seasonal. Yet, 3 significant developments encouraged travel. I. The creation of specific paths and routes used primarily by traders and pilgrims, and perhaps adventurers. E. Development of specialized vehicles for travel over land and on the water. E. Growth of urban centers and later cities along river banks and coastline. Such centers are known to have been established in Mesopotamia, China and India. The growth of cities indicated the need for political and economic contacts and the role of couriers, carriers and caravans became important. As travel followed a pattern of networks, resting places and food resources were provided along these routes. Soon we see the outpost growing into a market town or a commercial center that increased the range and scope of travel to distant parts of the known world. With the increase in contacts between the different parts of the world, the nature of consumption and travel began to change. As a consequence, specialization began to emerge. For example, wagons for goods and chariots for passengers. With specialization in vehicles, there was an improvement of paths and routes, with paving and distance markers as well as trees for shade. Better routes led to increased knowledge of the fabled wealth and prosperity of distant lands. The consequences were many, like emergence of wars of conquest or trade and commerce. 3.6 Early Empire. In the West, tourism became established in the Egyptian Empire and reached its zenith in the Roman period. In the East, the coastal empire in China and the Mauryan Empire in India were known for providing extensive facilities to the traveler. Road networks and transport were systematized into imperial highways, secondary roads for trade and village paths. Infrastructure for travel like caravanserais, inns, taverns and pantagar were common, wells were dug, security pickets were placed at convenient distances and dark chowkis were established. By this time there was a distinction between travel and the phenomenon of tourism. Whereas facilities along the roads were rough and often provided by T.L.C. state at no cost. Well-to-do travelers enjoyed special facilities. They were accompanied by kitchen staff, servants to look after the luggage of the household, tents, animals, food and other stores, water supply, etc. The evidence of such elaborate arrangements indicates a certain sophistication in the ability to travel in style. The traveler not only enjoyed the journey, but had home comforts at the destination. The stranger was known to bring prosperity and consume local services and products. All Asiatic cultures have the tradition of courtesy to the stranger. Folklore, Ayok tales, kathas and a variety of literary works do talk of Padasi or Athithi. It is perhaps the earliest reference to the traveler as a guest. 3.6.1 Egyptian civilization and Phoenicians. The Egyptian civilization attracted many tourists. The lighthouse of Alexandria was considered one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world. Here we see the genesis of nascent tourism related to curiosity and pleasure. Herodotus, the Greek traveler, has written about journeys enlivened by women playing on castavets and men playing the flute, while the rest of the company sang and clapped together during the voyage. On arrival at the destination there was a celebratory feast, often with a sacrifice for thanks giving. There was a lot of wine drinking and festivity at the end of the journey. Graffiti and messages on the walls were symbolic of the fame of Egypt's monuments. Between April and November many tourists traveled long distances to see the glorious monuments of Egypt. They returned with souvenirs to show off to friends at home. But tourism was seasonal and travel was taken when the weather was pleasant. The real adventurers, however, were the Phoenicians who extended the boundaries of the known world to the Atlantic in the west and Africa in the south from 11th century BC onwards. They also developed overland facilities and used their maritime skills to bridge rivers and develop trunk routes. They were also the first to use money as a form of exchange, which helped the traveler to lighten his load. No longer was it necessary to carry servants and supplies as it was possible to buy food and services along the way. 3.6.2 The Persian Empire. The Persians improved the travel infrastructure because their empire expanded over a large area. They designed roads and developed carrier wagons with 4 wheels and covered overhead, along with merchants, who now traveled all along the Mediterranean. The phenomenon of tourism also became established. 3.6.3 Greeks. New dimensions of tourism were developed by the Greeks who had extended the known world east of Africa. Their maritime expertise was based on the growth of the city-states along the sea coast. This was because the mountains in the hinterland were not conducive to the development of land routes. Their contributions to the development of tourism were several. 1. They established the system of currency exchange as the currency of some city-states was accepted outside the Greek states. 2. The Greek language became the common language in the Mediterranean. 3. The Greeks hosted festivals to attract travelers from all over the world. One important festival was the Olympic Games, held to display creative athletic skills in honor of the god Zeus. 4. The Greek theatre was also renowned and people came from far and near to see Greek tragedies and comedies. These were a reflection of the manners and philosophy of the time. 5. Scholars came to Greece to debate with its philosophers and to exchange medical skills with physicians and men of science. 6. The city-states became attractions for visitors. Athens was a renowned destination. Then as now, it had hospitality facilities that provided food, accommodation and entertainment like floor shows, dancing girls and gambling. 7. The Greeks introduced the custom of hiring a proxioros, a native guide who advised tourists on where to go and how to travel safely. 3.6.4 The Romans. The Romans had a keen admiration for Greek manners and lifestyle. However, they refined most of the new developments introduced by the Greeks through their remarkable sense of organization. They had under their control, both politically and culturally, the largest empire in the West. For a long period the Roman legions brought peace and prosperity to many lands and people. As a result, not only the Roman elite, but also the trading middle class began to build villas along the coastline and in the mountains as holiday homes. They were served by a slave economy and had the most luxurious artifacts from various corners of the world. Tourism grew in this period for the following reasons. 1. Roman coins were the official currency all over the empire. 2. The empire was served by an excellent and planned network of roads, called the Appian Ways, and waterways were also in popular use in all parts of the empire. 3. Greek and Latin became the official languages of the empire, which stretched from Scotland in the west to the Euphrates in the east. 4. As the wealth and prosperity of Roman citizens increased, they were motivated by pleasure, curiosity, as well as an interest in the cultures of the people they brought under their control. 5. They developed spectator sports as a relief from boredom. Games and gladiatorial contests were popular events. 6. Sightseeing trips and excursions took the tourist to Greek temples, sanctuaries and works of art. Egypt and Asia Minor, modern Turkey, were renowned for their magnificent structures and became popular destinations. Unnamed scholars had created an itinerary of the 7 wonders of the world to which Roman visitors were attracted. 7. Travel to mineral springs, or what today we refer as health tourism, was also an important activity. The springs were closely associated with shrines and drew pilgrims as well. 8. Literary references made certain naturally beautiful places an attraction for the educated travelers. In India, during the early period, a sophisticated agricultural economy made the export of cash crops an important trade link. Manufacture of iron ore into steel for weaponry was another important item of trade by the later Vedic period. Tools and textiles were other renowned Indian products. Contemporary Greek and Hebrew scholars have noted the wonder of India and her fabled wealth. Because of the predominance of trade routes over land crossing between Asia and Europe, trade tours were an important feature of Indian community life. Caravanserais were therefore an important development in this period. From hymns and epic poems we learn that sporting events and ritual sacrifices were also popular festive occasions. The Mahabharata gives an interesting account of such a fair, the kings who attended it and what offerings were made. The Arthashastra reflects the protection given to merchants and their high status in Indian society. Insurance and safe passage for goods, regulation of prices, weights and measures, and the use of gold, silver and copper as rates of exchange also indicate a well-developed mode of trade and travel. The royal capitals were the urban trading and industrial centers with a network of rural settlements to support them. Trade overland and on inland waterways was well developed. Military roads expedited the fast movement of merchant caravans bringing luxury goods to the royal court. Brahman villages evolved into centers of learning, attracting journeymen and scholars. At this time the Buddhist Sangha established the tradition of the pilgrimage, when monks went from village to village and court to court, preaching the value of the middle path. Rest houses or panthagas were provided for the mendicant traveler. Monasteries also attracted the monk, the merchant and the layman. Several expeditions crossed from Greece via Persia or Mesopotamia to India. But travelers' accounts are few. Greek accounts mention that in India chariot roads were well laid out and horses, elephants and camels were a common mode of transport. Trees for shade, wells, rest houses and security were also well organized. The Arthashastra details the importance of the travel infrastructure for the state. Classification of routes and types of vehicles. This is an indication that there was a well-developed mode of travel in India for the military, the commercial traveler, and the civilian. Travel on inland waterways was also under state protection and regulation. In cities, bazaars provided access to goods brought from the hinterland. Foreigners were accommodated in sirays at the city gates where all services were provided to them. There was strict control over the movements of travelers. They had to carry a note for safe passage from one territory to another. For their entertainment, taverns and dancing halls were allowed, but again inspectors ensured that the conduct of the travelers was not unruly. Gambling was licensed and was a source of revenue for the state. Traveling for pleasure on the rivers and to the hills was a tradition started by the royal courts. But such movement attracted all those who had business at the court to move with it from the heat and dust of the cities to the rural calm of the summer retreat. An example worth citing here is that of the Mughal emperors. They had great love for nature and traveled extensively. They contributed towards what today we call resort development. The Shalimar and Nishat Bagh at Srinagar are some examples. In fact, Jahangir travelled annually to Kashmir and in winter to the Trans-Vindhya region. Even today we can identify the travel culture in India's past by the coarse minars, mile stones, baulis, sarais and a network of roads and paths that make all corners of this vast country accessible. 3.7 Silk Route. Perhaps the most interesting link in the East-West movement of people was the Silk Route. This began in 2000 BC and transformed over time as modernization and natural causes dictated. The Silk Route is evidence of the fact that in intercontinental travel, inconveniences are disregarded by travelers. This is also because travel removes people's ignorance and superstitions. The Silk Route is reported in travel records, annals and chronicles written for courts and kings, and in the accounts of pilgrims meeting to exchange silk, muslin, fine glass, tea, rice and spices. The participants in the emporium trade also exchanged ideas and transplanted production process in different parts of the world. Like other forms of travel along the Silk Route, stages of the journey were short. Travel was generally in winter because the extreme topography and climate made the route one of the most hazardous and yet in terms of wealth most rewarding. Navigation was done by the stars when not following the courses of a stream or river. Revenue was collected from the traveler as a resource for the state. Larger states lured travelers with shelter and other facilities and lowered taxes to encourage wealthy people to visit their bases, towns and cities because the traveler brought wealth. Besides wealth and ideas, new technology also formed its way along this east-west axis. For example, irrigation, plants, flowers, printing, paper and gunpowder were also introduced to different countries via the Silk Route. The experience of the traveler indicated a frame of mind which may be described as touristic since it involved seeing new places, people and culture, increase knowledge and feel the novelty of the world. With the fall of the empire, there was a setback to trade and commerce. The mobility of the individual was also much reduced. However, we find the pilgrim and the artisan on his way to the fair as the travelers. The seaside resorts, the hill stations and spas that were centers of pleasure and recreation fell into disuse by the early medieval period. Yet, because of the development of touristic activities over the years, a complex character of tourism had certainly emerged. 1. Because of the complexity of motivations, needs and satisfaction, tourism emerged as an amalgam of phenomena and practices and their relationships rather than as a single or unique orientation. 2. These interrelationships arise from the movement of people to and their stay at various destinations, which provide the dynamic element in the progress of tourism. 3. That tourism gives rise to activities which are distinct from the resident and working population. 4. That tourist movements are temporary and relatively short-term in character, with intention to return to the place of residence after the travel is completed. 5. Destinations are chosen for a particular attraction, which could be business, vocational or pleasure-related. 3.8 Pilgrimage. We have seen that wish fulfillment was an important catalyst that had historically influenced travel. The human community, despite its highly developed capabilities, was always faced with problems that defied human solutions. From anthropological symbols to the development of theology, we see the appeal of the supernatural that has been greater than the laws of nature. The pilgrimage, Tirath Yatra, was therefore a journey undertaken for betterment on the spiritual and material plane. The key elements of the pilgrimage are belief and knowledge within a particular cultural context. In traditional societies, a pilgrimage earned God's grace and moral leadership in the community because sacred rituals and texts sanctified certain places associated with divine revelation. This was true of all religions. Oracles housed in hot springs, rivers and tanks, along with a veneration of nature, were early forms of the pilgrimage. Different religions, Christianity, Islam and Judaism, are similarly associated with sanctuaries and relics of their martyrs and saints. Pilgrims visited distant shrines associated with their beliefs. The pilgrimage was a release from poverty, war, sickness, persecution and misery beyond the control of human beings. Pilgrims always traveled in a throng and were on the road for a long period of time. They used the facilities of merchants and sanctified the major fairs which were located close to shrines, sacred rivers and tanks. Monasteries also provided refreshment and rest to the pilgrim. In many cases, people went on pilgrimage not out of devotion but because they enjoyed traveling through unknown lands in order to experience the novelties on the way. The pilgrims added to our knowledge of geography and a knowledge of what the world had to offer. They were often adventurers and explorers as well as being men of knowledge and culture. The pilgrimage continues to have both spiritual and social approval, and in countries like India, the state continues to provide facilities to the pilgrim whose devotion is matched by the desire to see new places and meet other people in the course of gaining punya merit. In the age of imperialism, many traditional beliefs were undermined, but the pilgrimage provided a resource to those who wanted to preserve their cultural identity. Political events between the two world wars brought about a new morality which resulted in a secularization of religion. When religion became a personalized experience, Eastern religious experiences and community identity began to reach out and win believers across the world. India too saw the emergence of cult figures who lead an international group of followers, e.g. Mahesh Yogi, Rajneesh and Satya Sai Baba. Metaphysical thought and meditation became an attraction, along with the tradition of Bhakti and Kirtan, e.g. Hare Krishna movement. This reviewed the missionary thrust. However, this time it was from the east to the west. This search for meaning by an alienated generation was seen as an early form of adventure rather than self-testing or pilgrimage. This was also because the youth traveled on shoestring budgets across the continents to reach their spiritual house in the East. Today, sociologists have broadened the concept of the pilgrimage to include non-sacred activities like travel to homes of modern idols and opinion leaders, film stars and others, rare ecosystems and environmental or ethnic regions. The search for one's roots is yet another form of pilgrimage that has inspired many across the world to undertake a journey back home. In a country like India, where for the mass of the people tourism may be economically unfeasible, the pilgrimage is a vital and living experience. With a higher personal income and better education, there is an increasing secularization of beliefs and pleasure. Components are being added to the familiar pilgrim routes and itineraries. Consequently, monasteries, temples and shrines have now begun to advertise special tours because the economic benefits of pilgrim tourists have become alluring for these trusts. Melas at sacred shrines are now great attractions, apart from the special Kumbh Melas held in Ujjain, Nasik and Allahabad. Pilgrimage sites have also become important tourist destinations because they are so closely linked with the cultural identity of a destination. Like Varanasi or Gangotri. 3.9 Grand Tour. The term is popularly understood to describe a circuit of Western Europe undertaken by a wealthy social elite for culture, education and pleasure. It is a frequent reference point in the history of tourism in Europe. Most modern studies have a conventional image of the tour, without recognizing that it was the first extensive movement of tourists for which we have primary sources like letters, journals and diaries of tourists. These sources indicate that any extensive movement of tourists is brought about by a particular social and cultural environment, and each country can develop its own perspective on the nature of the grand tour. The impact of such a tour on art and intellectual life, social and economic history as well as literature indicate that the aristocracy was perhaps most visible. However, it is the middle class, both merchant and scribe, who have recorded the passage of the tourist, while the artisan has passed on his craft and skill in the search for a master. There are several debatable assertions regarding the grand tour, that it followed a prescribed route and was leisurely in pace. Now, we have evidence of no set pattern being followed and also traveling as fast as possible. It is also questionable that the grand tour was an essential part of a diplomatic training or the rounding off of a spell at Oxford or Cambridge. Was it the result of a secularization of religion? Was the decline of the tour due to the coming of the railways or changing cultural values with the increase in the size of the middle class? The idea of the grand tour as an extensive itinerary for tourists to follow owes something to all these factors in the course of its development. We can mention the characteristics of the grand tour as follows. 1. The grand tour can be defined in terms of class, which would determine the places visited and the mode of travel. For example, the nobility would follow the court to resorts in the hills, near lakes or along the coast. The aristocracy and the high officials would follow suit as well as visit renowned centers of learning. 2. The grand tour can be defined by the destinations on the itinerary, but such a definition would limit the classes involved in extensive travel. 3. The Oxford English Dictionary defines the grand tour as a tour of the principal cities and places of interest in Europe, formerly said to be an essential pari of the education of young men of good birth and fortune. This definition, besides being Eurocentric, has class limitations and has been broadened to suggest that the tour was of certain places and cities of Western Europe undertaken primarily, but not exclusively, for education and pleasure. 4. Reasons for undertaking the grand tour were also diverse: career, education, culture, literary, health, scientific, business and economic. At different times one or more of these motivations could have been the primary one, depending on the social status, cultural environment and trends in transport and accommodation. The grand tour itinerary was closely linked to the availability of tourism resources, both relating to trends in fashion as well as facilitation. The timing was also related to seasonal variations as well as events and activities of the concerned individuals. Similar trends affected the length of stay at different destinations. 6. An emergent tourism industry also began to direct tourism flows in the 19th century, as commercial facilities were required to supplement the informal and formal arrangements that merchants, pilgrims and tourists had commonly used in earlier times. Thus, accommodation in inns, taverns and rented rooms became common, particularly in the cities. Regular transport services were established and guidebooks were available. There were guides as well as porters. Cycling and walking tours also gained in popularity. Finally, banking arrangements through exchange notes were made to give added facilities to the tourist. The stage was now set for the emergence of a travel organizer, like Thomas Cook who provided all these facilities to the tourist on his package tours. 7. The Grand Tour made tourism a family affair and soon women travelers began to travel. This phase of the history of tourism has an abundance of material. The only problem is of selection and analysis, so that it would be available at one place for any time period or destination. 3.10 feet Transition to modern tourism. In Europe, the transition to modern tourism came about principally due to the revolutionary changes in technology, rising personal incomes due to rapid industrialization, and enterprise of middle-class professionals, like Thomas Cook, who began to organize tours for the inexperienced traveler. In India, British colonialism reproduced the form of tourism at home in the colony. The hill stations became the destinations for the administrative and commercial elites as summer retreats. Beaches along the east coast like Puri, Voltaire and Marina and Juhu on the west coast catered to the desire for seaside holidays. Adventurers, scientists and merchants took to the mountains to explore and map the distant corners of the expanding British interests in the subcontinent. The railway system made all the resorts accessible to the British tourist and the Indian elite. Railway hotels and guest houses run by the Anglo-Indian community provided impetus to the growth of resorts. There was a bifurcation in the form of tourism for the middle class and the elite. The pilgrim centers, located in the hills near spa centers or at the confluence of venerated rivers and temple towns, continued to draw visitors. The visitors now began to build second homes in these areas which had a regular clientele. The second home phenomenon was responsible for the growth of hill stations like Manali, Ooty and Darjeeling, as well as the beach towns of Puri, Voltaire and Juhu. The institutional pattern of the British Indian administration, including schools, colleges, courts etc., encouraged the exodus from the towns and cities of India to resort regions in the vicinity. The well-to-do had country estates which were located in rural areas. Travel for a change had become a well-established Indian tradition by the time India became independent. Sir John Sargent, in 1948, began to look at international aspects of tourism. Europe had a committed number of Orientalists who were interested in continuing the Indian connection. Besides, there were many Britishers who were unwilling to return to the grim climate of their home country. They were also completely alienated from social manners and culture at home. They were the hangover from the Raj, people who had devoted their lives to India and were not ready to break these ties. Sargent also indicated the economic advantages of international tourism and recommended the setting up of a tourist traffic cell at Indian embassies abroad and in the Ministry of Transport to facilitate tourism to India. Civil aviation had linked India to Europe in the 1930s. The railways spanned the length and breadth of the country, and the circuit houses and dak bungalows provided a European standard of accommodation, catering and entertainment to the visitor. The trained manpower also existed, apprenticed to the Sahib log during the long years of the Raj. Recreation of facilities like tennis, cricket and golf clubs, theatres and libraries are common features of such resorts. India was now ready to launch itself on the world tourism scene. Single quote. 3.11 Modern tourism in India. The rail network in India placed the means of recreation within the reach of an increasingly large number of people who had leisure time and the income to enjoy it. Apart from the box wala and the babu log, the middle class and the working people were also exposed to a travel culture. The 9 private airlines were incorporated into the Public Sector Corporation, Indian Airlines, with a view to establishing an air transport network to link the remotest areas of the country. Domestic tourism was encouraged by providing the LTV travel concession. Since the new industrial giants in the public sector now provided employment to people from all parts of the country. Youth and students were also provided concessions to travel and study in different parts of the country. ICL greater than. International tourism was promoted for its economic benefits, particularly foreign exchange earning, which a newly industrializing country like India needed. In the early 1960s, it was decided to establish the India Tourism Development Corporation, LTDC. The idea was to provide Western comforts to international visitors at the major tourist attractions in the country. ITDC was to play the role of a catalyst in developing a modern superstructure, like 5-star Ashoka Hotel, for international tourists. The government set up the infrastructure to promote tourism by establishing India International and Tourism Promotion offices in London and Frankfurt. The tourism cell in the Ministry of Civil Aviation was upgraded into a department. The private sector was invited to establish luxury facilities for the high-spending tourist. The first pioneer in this field was Mohan Singh Oberoi, who began his career in hotelaring with the Clark's Hotel in Shimla and the Grand Hotel in Calcutta. By the late 60s, the Ministry of Civil Aviation was bifurcated and the first Director General of Tourism, S.N. Chib, began to formulate India's tourism policy. He called in UN experts to identify a modern Indian tourist product that explored resources for tourism that would attract the mass tourist looking for a value for money spent at a holiday destination. As a result, the Gulmarg Ski Resort and the Kovalam Beach Resort were established. The private sector was encouraged to develop Goa after its liberation from Portuguese rule. The Golden Triangle of Delhi, Agra, Jaipur still continued to be the main attraction for tourists, who still did not see India as a holiday destination. However, Kashmir Valley, with its unique houseboat culture and the religions and history of India, continued to draw the Orientalist, even though India was not really a competitor in the world market. By this time, the travel trade had come of age. Sita World Travels, established by Inder Sharma, began to package India tours, and is today a front-runner in the field of travel and tours, with offices all over the world. Organizations like the Travel Agents Association of India, TAI, Indian Association of Tour Operators, LATO, etc. also played their role. However, the travel trade till today brings tilde 20% of international tourists to India. This indicates that tourism in the country still has to come of age. In the 1970s, tourism was separated from the Ministry of Civil Aviation, and this indicated the growing importance attached to tourism in India. To strengthen the tourism infrastructure, state tourism development corporations were set up to provide accommodation and transport facilities at tourist destinations around the country. Almost every state has a tourism department which frames the tourism policy of the state. By 1980, India's tourism policy established the importance given to the expansion of international tourism, although the target of 1 million tourists was still not achieved. Domestic tourism, a social objective, was in the meanwhile reaching a much larger dimension, estimated at 40 million. A small attempt was made to start collecting data from the states, but domestic tourism was never visualized as the main focus of tourism development. The stress on foreign tourism was because of the frequent balance of payments crises faced by the country in this period. The 1 million target achieved in 1990 remains a milestone in the development of tourism in India. An ambitious National Action Plan, 1992, hopes to double India's share of the international tourism market from 0.50 to 1% by doubling hotel capacity in the classified accommodation sector to 80,000 rooms and allowing an open skies policy in air transport, including charters, new markets and diverse products like adventure, sports, fairs and festivals and golf along with the traditional cultural attractions are now being developed into circuits which cover the main tourist destinations in the country. 1992 was celebrated as the tourism year. Tourism has been recognized as an industry, and many policy benefits and incentives have been given to the private sector to invest in tourism to encourage its growth. A new feature of the 1980s was the emphasis on tourism education and training. Apart from the food craft and hotel management schools, the Indian Institute of Tourism and Travel Management was set up to train tourism administrators under the Ministry of Tourism. Now it is in Gwalior. Many universities also began to introduce vocational education, and tourism education was one of the options offered at certificate, diploma, and graduate levels. 3.12 Summary. A history of tourism developed mainly through indirect sources in the early period. It was only with the onset of 20th century that statistics and information on tourism began to be directly collected. Trade and pilgrimage played an important role in tourism traffic in the pre-modern times. However, the growth of modern technology, RTSING incomes and modern entrepreneurs' hips contributed to the emergence of modern tourism. Thank you for watching. We will see you in the next video with the next chapter.